Welcome, and we are so glad that you're here for another mental health and wellness chat. I'm Brittany, and I'm here with
Madison,
and we are two of your VC Counseling Center counselors.
an associate.
And we're here to have real conversations about the emotional challenges that students face and discuss navigating them.
So today we're diving into breakups, loneliness, and how to start moving forward. Whether you're feeling lost, overwhelmed, or just need to hear you're not alone, you're in the right place. This episode is for anyone struggling after a breakup, whether it ended last week or last year.
And I feel like breakups are so hard, first of all, because we've all been there, right?
Yes.
I feel like you're probably listening to this episode because you've been there or you're currently there now.
Mm-hmm.
And before we start in this, what is probably going to be a really lengthy discussion, I was just telling Madison, we're probably going to get sucked into this rabbit hole. Probably bit off a really big piece for one episode. So this might turn into like a multi thing, but
bear with us.
We've all been there, like breakups, loneliness. It's not rare and it's definitely not shameful. And I guess we want to start by just normalizing this experience that, a lot of times I'll have people come and they'll say, am I overreacting? Am I being dramatic? It really wasn't even that big of a deal. Why is this impacting me so much?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into some of the hows and whys and kind of discuss this concept as we go today. But that's really what this is for too, is to just, kind of normalize that, you're human, you cared about someone and that's why you're upset. And that's actually a positive thing, that you could and do care that deeply about another human. So I guess just starting out, let's normalize the experience that this is common. Everyone experiences it. It's hard to find a person on earth that hasn't experienced a breakup, for sure.
Yeah. It's normal to experience a wide range of emotions after a breakup. You're probably going to be crying more than usual.
Yeah.
It feels like it's a huge adjustment. You almost feel lost in a sense. I think those are all normal things to experience following a breakup.
Yeah. And depending on the seriousness of the relationship too, like a huge chunk of your life has probably changed too. Your routine,
Oh yeah,
the things that you do, your schedule, it's a complete, like I said, depending on the seriousness of the relationship, it's a total overhaul of all of these things. So not only are we grieving the relationship and the person, but we're also grieving the life we thought that we would have, the things that we wanted, the things that we do, and our routine.
Yeah, this person was most likely a huge part of your life. And for them to be there one day and they're gone the next, that's, like you said, that's grieving. That's the loss of a person, even if they're still physically here. It's very hard. So now that we've kind of normalized some things that might occur after a breakup, there is kind of a fine line of when breakups start to impact our life negatively that I kind of wanted to briefly touch on. So some examples I think of is maybe you're finding it really hard to get out of bed. Like you're feeling extremely unmotivated. You find yourself, like I said, just you can't do anything outside of just, maybe laying down, sleeping, those kind of behaviors. That's something that I would say, okay, that might be a little bit concerning. Additionally, if you find that you're starting to isolate from your friends and family just because you're feeling so emotionally distraught, and just so distressed over this experience, that's something that could be, a little concerning as well when it comes to breakups.
Thinking about it 24/7, it's the only thought that you can have, not being able to do the things that you need to do in a day, like you're missing class, not going to work, you're not cleaning your room, you're not doing laundry. So it's like this breakup, these emotions dominate your entire life. And I will say a level of that is normal the first probably 2-3 days after a breakup that really mattered to you. Most people will have a really rough time for a few days at least. But I guess for me, I would feel like if this has been going on consistently for a week, we're starting to get into problematic territory for most people.
Yeah, and I know with a lot of episodes, we talk about the length of time is something that we like to look at and just how big of an impact it's having on your day-to-day life. Like Brittany said, are you not showing up for work? Are you not getting together with friends? You're not showing up for classes. This has completely impacted your life in a negative way. And so that's something to really pay attention when it comes to breakups. And then lastly, I think just starting to maybe engage in more frequent substance use, like much more than you normally would. Maybe you're using that to kind of avoid feeling all the feelings. You're just trying to get your mind off of everything with those substances. that can become problematic if that's not, carefully handled.
Yeah. And I think that comes a lot to motivation for use too. Like, am I using this substance in order to cope with this emotion or to not feel this thing? Then that's where it's definitely can be problematic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I know most of our students are non-traditional. We do have a handful of traditional students. And what I mean by that is, a traditional student is kind of the American dream student, right? Where you come out of high school and you go straight into college and you do all of the steps at a young age, versus non-traditional is anyone that doesn't fit that category, right? So most of our students are non-traditional, but I think it's worth pointing out too, looking at this idea of like, are college breakups different than high school breakups for our students who are younger and following a more traditional path? And I think that it definitely is, in this idea of, a high school relationship is very different than a college or an adult relationship. I feel like a lot of times in a high school relationship, we are at home with our caregivers or parents. We're younger. The expectations are, I don't want to say lower, but I guess for me, the difference is when you move in and you live with someone, I guess. Like, that's a whole nother level versus not living with an individual.
Yes.
I feel like it's a different level of maturity and attachment in an adult relationship versus a high school relationship. But I also feel like high school relationships are so high emotion and more high emotion a lot of times than college relationships or adult relationships, right?
I would say so. That's kind of what I was thinking about too. Maybe especially in a first relationship, like all those emotions are just so new and fresh, and we're still kind of working on our, regulation. And I don't know. So for it to come to an end like that, I can see that having a really big impact on somebody, especially if that was their first experience in a relationship.
Yeah. And I feel like too, whenever you break up with someone that you live with, and even if you don't live together, but let's say you spend a lot of time at each other's places as adults independently, I feel like that is definitely a different type of loss than a relationship like in high school, where you really only see each other at school or when parents allow, or all these different things. So, I do want to normalize this idea that sometimes I'll see students and they'll say, I've broken up with people before, but this is different, or this is more difficult to cope with in some way than that was. And I guess I'm normalizing that too, because it's a different type of relationship now, moving into the adult world. Relationships just kind of look different and have different types of attachment and different levels of attachment than high school relationships did.
Yeah, I think it's more, it can feel more significant, and like there's more emotional weight when it's a college or, adult relationship. Like you said, you're living together with someone. Most likely you're having conversations about your future, like talking about, do we want to have children together? Do we want to get married? And
the financial weight too.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot more significant aspects that maybe are not in play when you're in high school.
Yeah, for sure.
So for sure. Yeah. And I think with all of this, if you are listening to this video, the main point we're wanting to hone in on is that you're not alone, and that even if it feels really rough and intense right now, if you are going through a breakup or if you have been through one in the past, it is eventually going to get better. It's a process. It takes time to just be patient with yourself and give yourself the grace that you need. Because like we said, while it feels awful in the moment, we're hoping it's only going to be temporary, and you're only going to go on to bigger and better things.
And that's such a common thing too. I'll see people have these expectations of, well, I should be more over this. I should not be this impacted by it. I should, already be moving on. It's been 2 months, 6 months, a year, name any time frame. And I should be XYZ, whatever. And I think that's can be really problematic, the expectations we have for ourselves, rather than kind of accepting where we're at and saying, from a self-compassionate standpoint, saying, hey, this is really hard for me. And clearly I'm still moving forward. I'm still processing through this, and that's okay. And I guess there's a difference between being graceful with yourself and enabling, where, I'm still doing unhealthy behaviors. I'm still checking their Instagram every day. I'm still, stalking them on socials. I'm still doing all of these things, versus just kind of having that grace for myself and saying, like, it's okay to still feel something about this. It mattered in some way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a big distinction to make when you are kind of dwelling on why it has been taking you so long. Because are you contributing to why it's taken so long, or are you actively trying to, process your emotions and and move on.
Yeah. So one good question to start with here is, why do breakups hit so hard? Why is this such an issue for most people? And I do want to point out that breakups aren't just about the person. Yes, there's an aspect of a breakup where we're mourning that specific individual, our emotions, our love, our feelings for that person. That is upsetting, right? But it's not only about the person. It's also about the routine, your identity as a partner, the future plans that you had. Like Madison said, you're grieving this whole imagined life that we were going to have, this whole reality that was supposed to happen, that we planned on, we thought through, we put so much time and effort into. And I feel like a lot of times we also grieve that effort too, that, I gave everything that I had to that relationship and it wasn't enough because it ended, is the negative message there, which can absolutely be untrue. Yes, sometimes relationships do end because of things that we did or didn't do. But I mean, that's way too much to unpack here in a podcast. But ultimately, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is that it's not just about the person. And it's good to take a step back and recognize all of this, right? Because it can help us actually process through the parts of this that we're kind of getting stuck on. So we also want to point out too, that especially the younger that we are, our brain doesn't fully develop until we're 25, maybe 30-ish. And the younger that we are, a lot of times, this is why high school relationships hit so hard, is because our brain processes emotional pain much like physical pain. So there's been a lot of scientific studies that have been done to show that the regions of our brain that activate during physical pain are the same exact regions of our brain that activate during social rejection, like a breakup, whenever someone says they don't want to be with us. So it reacts in a very similar way. So sometimes that breakup and that emotional pain can actually feel exactly like physical pain for us.
Wow.
And I think that's something interesting to point out and be aware of too, is that feeling rejected in those ways is significant to someone's mental health, right?
Definitely. I thought that was such an interesting thing to hear. And just like with a lot of things we've talked about on this podcast, the physical and the mental are so intertwined, and it's understandable why we get these physical reactions whenever we're going through, like you said, rejection or a big breakup like this.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really awesome that you pointed that out. Another good factor to kind of take into account when it comes to breakups is social media. Social media can be great, but it can also be very hard whenever you're going through a breakup, because you still have access to seeing them, their friends, their life after you. And that can be really difficult.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can feel like a competition of like, who's winning the breakup, who looks like they're doing better after breaking up with one another.
Well, and not to mention too, sometimes depending on the maturity level of your partner, the passive aggressive posts and videos and whatever, which can also just be like a double sting at the end of it too.
For sure. And, it can even turn into, oh my gosh, like, are they with anybody right now? Have they posted someone? Like, it can get bad. I mean, you can start going through the likes, the comments. You can really drive yourself crazy looking at social media.
Because then we jump into that self-comparison too, even of, and once again, so much to unpack, but, when they do finally move on and get with another partner and it's public and you happen upon that information, like that natural self-comparison, which is totally destructive and unhealthy, but it's so common of, oh, are they prettier than me? Are they this than me? Are they that than me? Are they more attractive? Are they, it's so hard to not, for a lot of people, to fall into that comparison trap.
Definitely. And on the topic of social media, it's also important to point out that it's usually very filtered and curated. So even if maybe your ex-partner is going through a hard time, you're not going to see that.
Yeah,
they're not going to post themselves videos like of themselves crying, or, when they put that like black screen with like a really emotional sad quote or something. Yeah. Like that's usually not going to happen. So you're going to be seeing like the highlight reel. They're probably going to be posting with their friends, doing, really cool things. And so of course that's, like we said, that's where that social comparison comes in. You start to really just overthink everything about what you're seeing about them.
Yeah, and I think it's good. I mean, there's a debate. It's a hot button issue whether or not blocking your ex on all social media is the only way to move on or the most recommended way to move on. And ultimately, I think it depends on your situation, but I will co-sign most of the time. In 99% of cases, most of the time is very unhealthy to keep them on your feed simply because, I mean, it does. It's right there. You have access to it.
Yeah.
And we're humans. A lot of times we struggle with the self-discipline to not go through it. And that's what I say. Individual, you. If you know you're going to be friends with your ex and you're fine with that and it's not causing you any negative emotions, then it's probably fine. But I guess if it's causing you negative emotions and it's becoming problematic, then it's like, why would we keep doing this thing? The block button is your best friend sometimes for your mental health and well-being. And, it's okay to still check their Instagram if that's what you need to do at this point in your time. You're human. But, talking about how do we break this loop gently, right? So, if that's something that you insist that you need right now, okay, but how do we look towards breaking that loop? Because it's a loop, it's a feedback loop, and it can become never ending for a lot of people, and it can become very destructive for a lot of people.
For sure. And I think just recognizing when you're falling into that loop can be really helpful, asking yourself, and what am I gaining from this? Is this harmful or helpful for me? And is there something I could be doing to better spend my time and help me actually move on?
Yeah, and help you grow.
Yeah.
And, flourish as a human being for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that falls into those destructive coping skill categories of,
yes.
They're very healthy ways to process a breakup. And then there's some very self-destructive means of processing a breakup. And I feel like, kind of torturing ourselves in that way would definitely fall into destructive. Same thing with, holding on to heirlooms or, important things from that relationship, jewelry, whatever it might be, clothes. So, and that's why I say there's no formula. There's no one size fits all approach. It's about kind of finding yourself where you're at and where you're ready to move forward and what feels good for you, while also acknowledging that it is a process, especially depending on the relationship.
Definitely.
Sometimes some people can just break up, move on, and be fine next week. Other times people are still struggling with a breakup 6 months later and are still taking those baby steps as we go. But I guess what matters is that it's forward steps, not even if we step backwards, we want to make sure that one step backwards, two step forwards.
Yeah, we get back on track for sure. Yeah, every relationship is so different. Everybody copes differently. Everybody moves on differently. So that's why we say it's so important to give yourself grace with whatever your healing process looks like, because it is so individualized for everybody. And just, touching on destructive coping skills, I think it's important to kind of maybe be aware of how to not fall into those more harmful coping skills. And there is a lot of ways you can work on that. I think a big one is surrounding yourself with people who are going to be able to support you during this time, kind of keep your mind occupied in healthy ways. Maybe they can be like, hey, let's go out to eat, or let's go to the mall, like just things like that to just get you out of the house, get your mind occupied on more things that actually can bring you joy, give you good conversation. I think that's huge for kind of keeping you on track. Additionally, whenever it comes to not falling into destructive coping skills, I would say just really take the time to learn more about yourself. Whenever we get into relationships, it's great, but sometimes we can kind of hold back on things that actually bring us joy and like our hobbies and our interests. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of dive back into those. And like a lot of self-care for sure is a big part of it as well.
No, absolutely. And on top of it too, allowing yourself time and spaces to verbally process this with people. So talk it through with people. And I hear this a lot from people. They'll say, I've talked this to death with everyone in my life and they're tired of hearing about it and it's exhausting. And, people are avoiding me now. And I feel like everyone's going to hate me because this is all that I talk about. When in reality, for me, that need to process it over and over again tells me that there's something that you're missing. There's something that you need further process on, and maybe you just need to have a different conversation. And this is where counseling can be really helpful too, of not only giving people that space to continue talking about it and not feeling that judgment of, oh, my mom is so tired of hearing about this. But also gives us that space to maybe hear the conversation from a different perspective.
Yes.
So that's why I say it's really good. Don't beat yourself up about needing to talk this through multiple times with multiple people. But at the same time, there is a point where, I guess for me, it's like if we're repeating the same thing over and over, having the same conversation 1,000 times and we're not getting what we need from it, for me, that would be a clue. Okay, maybe we need to have this in a different way then, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a reason that you're bringing it up. I'm sure you don't want to keep talking about this every chance possible, but there is something that's still bothering you. So sometimes having that conversation with an objective person like a counselor can be really helpful for uncovering that reason.
And I think it's really good too to point out here that just because the relationship ended does not mean that it failed or you failed. Because I see this a lot. This is a really common negative message that people come in with whenever they're coming with breakups, is even if they don't explicitly recognize it, it's I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, I didn't do enough, or this relationship failed. And yes, there is levels of responsibility, right? Your partner had levels of responsibility in why this ended, and you do as well. But ultimately, I mean, it takes two at the end of the day, and sometimes things just don't work out. It doesn't have to be someone's fault. We don't have to point a finger at someone every single time and say, this is why. Sometimes it just wasn't meant to be. Just didn't work out. Yeah. Most cliche thing I can possibly say in this episode.
But it's so true. Like, we don't have to beat ourselves up about it. We can use this as a learning experience to hopefully better prepare us for next time.
Yeah. And on top of that too, I mean, relationships can be meaningful, but still not last forever too.
Absolutely.
I think that's important to acknowledge as well, is that, because it didn't last forever, that means that it was pointless or didn't matter. Like, no, it still mattered. You still grew in some way as a person through this experience.
Yes.
Even if it was to identify the traits you do not want in future partners, you grew through that experience. Obviously it's awful that you had to go through that to grow in that way. But, that is what we gained from this experience, is that, you grew through that and learned and were able to identify more accurately what you want from a relationship and what you want from a partner as well.
Yes, for sure. And, just because the relationship is over, it doesn't mean that it was pointless or that you were foolish to love them. I mean, ultimately there was something that drew you to this person. You saw the potential for a relationship. Just because it ended, it doesn't just take that fact away. Like you said, there's so many things that we can learn from relationships, whether it's about ourselves, whether it's about, our needs in a relationship, what we want in a future relationship, what we don't want. There's so many valuable points for growth after a breakup. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that we grow through relationships with other people, relationships, friendships, any connection with another person. We grow through that, even and especially the painful ones. We grow through those. I mean, if you learned about yourself, your needs, or even what red flags to look for in the future, then that relationship gave you something real by the end of it.
Yes.
And I think that is the key point of this episode.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do want to point out too, I mean, a lot of times one of the biggest complaints about breakups is that loneliness afterwards, and such a common experience of, spending most of your time or every second of every day with a person and going from that and total, I don't want to say emotional dependency, but a high level of it to all of a sudden them not being there and feeling lonely. And I do want to point out that there is a difference between the feeling of loneliness and being alone. So objectively, there's nothing wrong with being alone. You're going to be alone at points in your life.
Yeah.
And you are throughout the day. But loneliness is that a lot of times people make it a negative emotion that comes while being alone, if that makes sense. So, loneliness is that feeling of wanting to be with another person. I don't even think it's about being with. For most people, it's about connecting with another person, feeling seen, heard, understood, valued by another person, and wanting that more than the actual person itself. Sometimes, a lot of times, like, we can recognize, this partner was objectively unhealthy and I don't want to be in that relationship, but I also want to feel the way that I felt in that relationship again. I think that's the hardest part of a breakup for people.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we have this need to be needed, this need for connection. And after a breakup, that can be really hard to navigate those new feelings of isolation and just going on without that connection that you previously had. And just to briefly touch on it, sometimes being alone can be really great, especially after a breakup. Like I said, it can give you that time for, rediscovering yourself and just taking the time to care for yourself in ways that maybe you didn't have the opportunity to when you were in a relationship. So just to kind of give that being alone a positive reframe, it can be very helpful at times.
Absolutely.
And so a good question is how to navigate that feeling of isolation, especially when friends overlap. You know, you shared friends and now you're broken up. That's a hard adjustment to make. You know, it can feel like sometimes, I know I see this portrayed on TV a lot. It can feel like, oh, some of my friends are team, you know, one person, the other friends are team, the other person. And it's like, oh my gosh, how do we move on from here? Like, it's going to be so awkward every time we get together now, you know, it's easy to kind of get caught up in those thoughts, and it might feel like you totally have to find a new friend group, but I don't think that has to be that way.
Yeah.
You know?
And I mean, I think it's so individualized because sometimes it is. I mean, sometimes depending on circumstances, sometimes friends will absolutely pick a side and, you know, put their heels down in that. And I feel like that's the anxiety, though, is going into these social situations or even feeling alone because I'm like, I can't reach out because what if they do confront me and say, you know, I don't want to be your friend anymore, or they ignore you. So it's like double rejection. Rejected by my partner and my friends. So I feel like that can contribute a lot to the isolation of, you know, I know that I want to reach out and I want people in my life, but I'm scared to reach out. And it's such a challenge. And like we said, I mean, especially after a breakup, a romantic partner breakup, it's very helpful to reach out to other social supports and kind of temporarily lean on them for right now for love, comfort, and support. So at the end of the day, it's always about your circumstance, right? You know your circumstance better than anyone. You know who your safe people places are. And if you genuinely have no one at the end of a breakup, you know, sometimes this is where counseling can kind of fill a gap too, of being able to talk through these things. And like Madison said, kind of start capitalizing on, okay, how do I start moving forward through this? How do I love myself? How do I find comfort being alone? How do I not feel lonely or work with loneliness in these times? Because, you know, like we always say, this podcast isn't a substitute for therapy and is absolutely not the same thing as therapy. It's just me and Madison having a conversation. But, you know, we're counselors. We're always going to work in where counseling could be beneficial for issues and things in life. Absolutely. So moving on. What does healthy healing even look like is the question.
That's the burning question, right? I mean, I think a lot of it is just really giving yourself the time and space that you need to process the emotions that you are feeling. We're not just jumping straight into another relationship. We're not just jumping into being busy all the time, distracting ourselves. You know, we're trying to stay in our normal routines, of course, but you know, there's a difference between staying in your normal routine versus constantly overworking, you know, overdoing just so that we don't have that time and space to feel what we went through. I think that's really the biggest part of it. There's so much more, of course, but I think really just being present and giving your emotions the time and space that they need is a huge part of healthy healing.
Well, and I think that comes back to our sitting with difficult emotions episode that we did too, because it's sitting with a difficult emotion. And, you know, we always normalize there's nothing wrong with avoidance in moderation. So yes, in the first few days after a breakup, when emotions are most raw, there's nothing wrong with staying busy and functioning through it. And then slowly unpacking this over time. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all at your own pace. But at the same time, like you said, I think it's important to look at, you know, actively working through these emotions, small steps, small forward steps, and not just kind of throwing them to the side. And, you know, really being honest with ourselves and asking ourselves, you know, what am I going through? What could I be doing differently here? What emotions is this bringing up for me? Is it bringing up rejection or this feeling that I'm not good enough? Or a lot of times our brain will assign messages of meaning to these events and things that, you know, because this relationship ended, it means that I'll never be a good partner. Because this relationship ended, it means that I am not worthy of love. Because this relationship ended, it means that the last 4 years of my life was a total waste of time. Fill in the blank, really. Ask yourself that question. Because this relationship ended, what does it mean about me? And then that can be somewhere workable to start with it. Of, you know, where am I getting stuck in this relationship or in this healing process from this relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's so easy to attach these negative meanings to the emotions that we experience, and that can really make it harder to process them, you know, in healthy ways and to start moving on and healing from the breakup. I think it's also important to point out that if we don't you know, honor those needs and those emotions that we're feeling and just, you know, avoid or suppress them. And then we jump into another relationship. Those emotions are going to resurface. They're going to come back even stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
That might bring up, you know, maybe some insecurities in your new relationship. So we just don't want the current breakup to bleed into the future breakup, I guess.
You don't want to like set the new relationship up for failure. No. You want to kind of start with a fresh slate with the best chance of success.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that, it's important to know that moving on is not a straight line by any means. It comes and goes in waves. Some days are going to hurt less. Some days are going to sting out of nowhere. And that's absolutely normal.
Yeah.
You know, like I say this a lot to students, you know, some days you're going to be having the best day of your life. And then the next day you're going to be crying out of the blue and you're like, whoa, what happened? I was just feeling so great. Yeah. But that's just how healing is. Grief in general. That's the process.
Yeah.
You know?
And everyone's so different too. If you're the type of person that gets very invested in relationships and love and that you take that very seriously, I mean, it's reasonable to say that for that type of individual, it would be much more difficult typically to move through these situations. And getting over it doesn't necessarily mean forgetting about your partner, because I also feel like that's unrealistic. You know, I still remember every partner that I've had a relationship with in my lifetime. Yeah. It's not something that you're just going to forget. It's just like grief. You're never going to forget that person. They mattered to you in some way.
Yes.
It's so great. Getting over it doesn't mean forgetting them. It just means learning to carry these emotions a little bit differently and carry yourself a little bit differently.
Yeah, we can still, you know, honor and like hold space for the good times and memories that we have with that person. But like you said, we learn to carry it differently. And like we've been saying, it gets easier over time.
Yeah.
We learn to adapt and adjust. Yeah,
for sure.
So a good kind of thing to maybe start practicing if you are someone who's going through a breakup is to reclaim your routines, you know, change it up. You know, like we were saying, whenever we're with someone, it feels like their life becomes our life. Like our routines become intertwined, you know, to a certain extent. So now that this relationship is over, this is a great opportunity for you to start, you know, doing things more
your way,
like individualized to you. Maybe that looks like walking a new path to class or, you know, changing your phone wallpaper. I know we're so used to having our significant other as our phone wallpaper. And
mine is my cat. Yeah.
I love that for you. So yeah, you like make it, you know, a cute cat picture or just like a inspirational quote or something, you know, just make it something that feels empowering and is going to help support you through this breakup process.
Yeah.
And additionally, just like I've been saying, reconnect with parts of yourself that may have gone quiet. You know, what are your hobbies? What are your values? What are your interests? Like, let's focus on those. Let's reignite that within you.
Refocus on me rather than we in this relationship.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And and there's lots of, you know, you can find lots of helpful tools and tricks and stuff, but like we've been kind of reiterating here, a lot of it is kind of finding your own path and finding what works for you. You know, for some people, journaling can be really beneficial, especially if you don't have people that you can talk to or you feel like you're talking it to death. Kind of writing it out can be really helpful for some people to think it through, get it out. Sometimes it helps us get that separation to say, like, you know, it's on the page now. I can pack this away because it's there instead. And then, you can always destroy it too. That's fun.
Yes,
and
I love
cathartic to just rip
Definitely.
the pages up when you're done.
Yeah. I always say, write a letter to this person. If you still have things that are unresolved and that you want to say, we're not sending the letter, just clarifying.
Yeah,
do not send it,
the letter.
But just write it as if you are writing it to that person and just get it all out. All the thoughts, all the feelings. And then, like you said, you know, get rid of it in a way that feels good to you.
Yeah. Because I mean, and a big part of this too is redefining those boundaries with that person too, that they're no longer the person that is safe right now for me to share these things with. And that's just part of a breakup. So part of it is, you know, yes, you still need to get these things out. So let's write it down. And then the boundary is they don't get to see that or hear that anymore from me because we're no longer in a relationship. And kind of finding that line of what benefits people get in a relationship from me and what things are things that you only get when we're in a relationship, and like letting you know what I feel and what I think and how you're impacting me. I mean, that's the question. Is that something that person has a right to know now that we're not together? Or is that something I keep for myself? For sure.
For sure. Additionally, maybe I always love music, no matter if I'm in a relationship or not, like playlists. I love making playlists, for different emotions. Sometimes we have that time when we're sad and we just put on more sad music so we can just be in our emotions.
Have you seen Spotify has fancy little playlists now for different things, and DJ will even like make them for you. Have you seen like the breakup playlists?
I don't know if I have.
It's hilarious. You should definitely look them up. They're hilarious. They have like a female breakup playlist, even like specific to gender, where it's just like I'm old, but like the early 2000s, like Pink and stuff like that. It's hilarious. I love it so much.
I love Spotify. It has so many different playlists for literally every mood that you're feeling. So just put that on, just listen to that. That can even help with processing your emotions, just cry it out, like listen to that music and really connect with the lyrics and what you're feeling.
No, for sure. And then we will touch on no contact, because I know this is something a lot of people come to is, the debate at the end of the day, right? Of if no contact is absolutely necessary for someone to move forward in a relationship. And we're not going to answer that question because, we're therapists. We're going to tell you it depends, right? Yeah. It depends on you, your situation, and what's best for you. And it's an individual decision that you have to make. But I will say that extended contact for a lot of people, it's difficult to move on because I have an emotional connection with you, and it's hard to redefine those boundaries if I'm maintaining a connection.
Exactly.
And it can be really confusing for most people. Yes. So it's important. I would encourage you to look at and evaluate, okay, where can I limit contact where I can, right? So obviously if we're in the same classes together because we were in a relationship and we did that and we made sure that we had the same time, now you're going to have to be in that situation. Maybe you tried to change your schedule and it just didn't work out. So looking at, where can I limit contact where I can, especially if contact or seeing them is causing me to backslide. That would be a good sign for me. Like, okay, maybe we should reevaluate our level of contact at this point. And then be able to say, even if no contact is something that you want to do, but it feels impossible, that's totally fine. Just try structured distance, if that makes sense. So structuring where even if we're in the same class, I'm going to sit on the other side of the room and I'm going to make sure they're behind me so that I can't see them, might be a way of compromising with yourself. But like I said, it's always, we're not going to tell you one way or the other. It depends on your situation and what is going to work best for you as a unique individual.
Yes. And I think that's the big message here, is that everything is so individualized and so unique to your circumstances.
And it's also totally normal too to have this idea of like delayed grief where, I feel nothing for a while and then all of a sudden it hits me 2 weeks or a month later. Also totally normal. Happens to so many people. And backsliding is part of the process. There's going to be times where you're totally moving forward and you're doing great. And then all of a sudden one day it's like you took 4 steps back. Part of the process. Absolutely normal. Do not beat yourself up for something like that.
Yeah. And another good thing that we want to touch on briefly is some early signs that someone might need some more structured mental health support. So like I was talking about earlier, me and Brittany were talking about earlier, if you find yourself really just struggling to function effectively day to day, like if you're not showing up for work, for classes, you're not, spending time with friends and family for, like you said, like a week or longer periods of time like that, that might be a really big sign that, counseling would be a good, starting step for you to just kind of see what's going on and how we can start working towards healthier patterns, Additionally, like we said, if you feel like your substance use is a lot higher than normal and you're using it to, like we said, like what's the function of this? Are you using this to avoid, to distract, to not deal with what's going on? That can be a bit concerning as well.
Absolutely. And even if, not even needing support, but even if you're just kind of struggling with this and you just want to kind of get a different perspective, counseling therapy can be really beneficial for that too. And I think it's important to note too that healing isn't about bouncing back or being, 100% back to normal either. It's just about growing through things and growing and continuously being better than I was yesterday, or at least taking steps towards that every single day.
Yes. I think sometimes there can be this pressure once you get out of a relationship to, like I'm going to get in the best shape of my life. I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to be the most social person. And that's not always realistic by any means.
Well, and sometimes it has the intention of being better than them or one-upping them in some way or making them see what they're missing, which, like, I hear you. I totally do. I hear you, girl. Like, I hear it at the end of the day. But I mean, why can't we do that for ourselves? Because I want to be healthier. Because why does it still have to be about them? You know?
That's a huge difference. Yes. And, you know, another important point is just knowing that you are allowed to mourn, to miss them, to feel mad and still heal. Like we said, there's going to be so many different emotions that you're experiencing throughout this process. And just like we've said, honoring them and taking the time that you need to really work through them is going to get you on the path to healing.
Absolutely. And always consider reaching out to the counseling center here at BC if you're a student. All the sessions are 100% free, whether it's one session or more. Someone here wants to hear you. We want to be here. Please engage if you absolutely need it. Another option is to also text the National Crisis Text Line at 741-741. If you text them, they will text you back. Same thing with 988 here on our screen. Utilize the resources available to you, especially if you're struggling or if you're having a hard time moving forward. There's so many resources here to support you. So thanks so much for joining us today in your go-to space for honest conversations about mental health and well-being. We're your hosts, Brittany
and Madison,
and we're so glad that you spent part of your day with us.
Remember, taking care of your mind is just as important as taking care of your body. Be kind to yourself, reach out if you need support, and know that you're never alone. Until next time, take care and take a deep breath.